And now, without further ado, we're going to bring in Rachel Konrad. Rachel and I, once upon a time, back in the 90s, worked together at the Detroit Free Press. And so I knew her when she was just a whippersnapper of a girl at 24 or so, I think you were at the time.
Yeah, very good memory. Yeah.
Yes, well,
Or
you know.
as my 17-year-old son says, back in the 1900s, which just makes me feel so old every time he says that. But there you go. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've
back
known
there.
Brennan since the 1900s.
Yes, that's pretty scary. And so we've kept in close contact over the years, and she was good enough to help my daughter become an au pair in Paris, which my daughter wanted to live overseas, and Rachel put that together. We won't go into high level of detail on that. So, and then I follow her on Facebook, which is where this is all leading. She posts incredibly long Facebook posts with like 150 pictures, and it's like I have to get a cup of coffee to read them. But the one that intrigued me was she went on a road trip with her Tesla Model Y, and there's been a lot of pro and con. Now, obviously, we're in Detroit; they're trying to get into EVs, but we still lack the infrastructure. However, that did not pose a problem for you. There was lots of charging stations everywhere, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, let me just unpack that a little. So, I mean, I was born in Detroit, grew up in Grosse Pointe Park, whole family was in the auto industry, the incumbent auto industry, right? My dad worked for Chrysler for 25 years. He was one of the first generation computer programmers, actually, starting back in the 60s. And I was out in California covering the tech industry back in 2000, right around the dot-com bust, right? And I did that for several years and then really wanted to try my hand at, in-house team doing comms and marketing and things like that. And at the time, I decided to go work for this completely obscure company that no one had ever heard of. I talked to this guy, Mike Brennan, as well as a bunch of other people about, should I do it? I don't know. And everyone was like, you're nuts. No, don't do that. That company was Tesla, and I was working directly for Elon at the time. And it was a really fascinating vantage point, right? I got to see the beginning of that company's commercialization journey. And I worked there from 2008 to 2011. And during that time, to be clear, we were just kind of thinking about the rudiments of how do we get this charging station built, right? Because there was a problem back in the early days of chicken and egg, right? There's no infrastructure, you can't charge, ergo, why would I buy an EV? And so Elon and Tesla took a very, very different approach, which is, you know what? Fuck it, we're going to build it. Can I swear on the show? I'm sorry.
There's no FCC on the internet, so go right ahead. So
he was like, fuck it, we're just going to build it. And so he started this, very difficult process. And the incumbents took a very, very different attitude, which was, you know what, governments and private partnerships and startups like ChargePoint and condo associations and everyone else should do the infrastructure play. And we'll just roll up with our car that you can plug in. And it didn't really work out that way. And while right now there's about 55,000 charging stations across America, and by the way, that's only a third of the number of gas stations, catching up very quickly. It actually that length of time where the incumbents, including all of the Detroit automakers, delayed and said, no, government will do it, don't worry. That's what really fueled Tesla's growth, right? So now Tesla has this high market share. It's, more than half of all EVs, right? And the incumbents are now really playing catch up. Plus, you're getting problems with the incumbents where it's like, am I a member of ChargePoint? No, I'm a different one. Oh, I'm Volta. So I got to go get my different credit card out. You're out there at Whole Foods, like trying to sign up for an app. It's a real shit show, honestly. Whereas the Tesla supercharger model, I got to say, it worked flawlessly. We did a 1,200-mile one-way trip from San Francisco Bay Area to remote place in New Mexico where my husband's family lives. Never had a problem. Every charging station we rolled up to had openings. It was, we stayed at the charging stations anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes. Had no problems whatsoever. It's all very clearly mapped out. I mean, I'm not one to generally have range anxiety, but I mean, I don't think that any normal person, even in the first time EV, would have had it on this trip. And it was, to me, very, very clear that we have reached a tipping point. And now in America at large, it's like 6% of all cars are electric, new car sales. That's that clear inflection point from sort of the early adopter mode where it's just for like rich hippies, right? It has now become mainstream. And I just think at this point, it is an inevitable decline for internal combustion engine vehicles. It's just so clear to me.
So, what advice are you offering your other brother and sister in here in Detroit, GM, Ford, Stellantis? Chrysler's been bought so many times I've lost track of what they call it anymore. The former Chrysler, how's that? So, how should they do it? I mean, I was looking at your notes. You got 17,000 Tesla superchargers. In fact, I shop at a Meyer store near here, and there's about a bank of a half a dozen of them right there too, as well. So, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, I've been saying this since I started at Tesla in 2008, right? Like there is an inevitable transition to zero emission vehicles, to zero emission energy, right? In the short term, it's going to be, photovoltaics. In the long term, who knows? Maybe it's fusion, I don't know what, or some combination, a rich mix of zero emission technologies. And so if you're an incumbent, I actually really understand why you would just rather sit there and amortize the billions and billions of dollars of sunk costs that you've put in for your, forging and your foundry plants, right? And your ICE technology, which requires at this point virtually no R&D efforts, right? So you're just trying to wring profits out of it. But in fact, that really, really exposes you to a competitive threat, probably one, a startup, right? Venture funded startup that you didn't even see coming, right? And I think that's the big takeaway, is that the same thing is now happening with autonomous drive. Same thing will be happening with, no driver cars, with drone fleet platooning, all of that kind of stuff. And I think that, it's a very costly mistake for Detroit to just sort of see its competition as this immediate peer group, right? That is not what it looks like from my perspective out here in Silicon Valley.
Speaking of venture capital, a drum roll, please. That's your new function, right? You're now a venture capitalist.
Yeah, I started working at a venture capital company a year ago called the Production Board, and everything that we do is build companies and even start companies from scratch in the world of food, ag, energy, and health, right? And so it's really all about transitioning the major manufacturing systems of our globe that are vile, gross polluting, old school mainstream manufacturing, and the way we raise animals so inefficiently for food, and the way we use fossil fuels for energy, all of that needs to go. It will go because it's not sustainable. And so our job is really to accelerate what we think is an inevitable transition to, synthetic biology and precision fermentation as major ways to get our food, zero emission technology for both cars and energy as a whole, and gene and cell-based therapies for individualized healthcare. Yeah.
All right. So, and what she left out of her resume or CV is getting back to the Paris thing. When you left, I'm trying to remember now. When you left Tesla, you were offered the job at the Alliance, Nissan, Peugeot, Renault, if I recall.
Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi, but
Mitsubishi.
Close.
I'm sorry, there were so many of them in there, and she was head of worldwide communications. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was the head of communications for Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi, and that notoriously I was reporting into Carlos Ghosn, now, Interpol wanted fugitive stuck in Lebanon. So that was quite interesting. So again, I'm speaking as someone who understands the incumbent industry. I'm not just some, Elon Musk acolyte living out here in Silicon Valley, living the dream in the land of fruits and nuts, right? I'm actually really well aware of how the incumbents work, because Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi, was really this groundbreaking cross-cultural alliance. And we worked very closely with Daimler, with Bajaj in India, with Lada. We own Lada in Russia, Avtovaz. And so I could really see very clearly the stark difference with how a startup functions. And I did the job for 5 years. Don't get me wrong. It was fascinating. But first chance I got, I came back to Silicon Valley because I could really see how, one or two very, very powerful startups can really force an entire industry to shift. And that's what Tesla's calling card was all along. Like back in the day in 2008, when I first met Elon, he, the media perception of him is like crazy egomaniac, narcissist. That is just not true from what I could see at the time anyway. He was pretty humble, to be honest, and actually very self-deprecating and pretty funny, hilarious, actually. And he used to say, look, our goal is not, to have Tesla be the, most important brand in the world. That might happen, but that would be a consequence of shifting the entire auto industry and energy industry, right, to zero emission transportation. Our goal, that's going to happen no matter what. Don't get anyone wrong. That's going to happen. Our goal is to shift it by 5 or 10 years. And in so doing, we will save, 30 billion tons of carbon from going into the atmosphere per year. And we will improve people's quality of life. We will make the planet cooler. We will significantly decelerate global warming's ascent, and we will actually have an impact that way. So that's really the goal of Tesla. And I would say, basically by 2010, 11, 12, when GM and Audi and everyone else started coming up with these Tesla killer programs internally, Elon's job was done. His impact is very clear. All the rest is kind of gravy at this point.
Okay. So if folks want to reach out to you, because I know you're kind of on the speaker circuit as well, besides you're now a lady venture capitalist, which is great. I mean, good for you.
I will say that. Yeah.
Yes.
Venture capital. I was just doing some stats on it. 86% of VC firms have literally never hired a woman.
That's why I made that reference, because you are a rare commodity out there. So
yeah,
normally a bunch of old white guys, because I deal with them all the time. So
there's a lot. Yeah, there are a lot. Yeah, there are also a lot. It's becoming much more diverse. I will say that very, very quickly. There's been a real shift in venture in the last 5 years where they're trying to bring in more operators, people who have very, very hands-on experience, whether you're at Facebook or one of the, FANG companies, or you've had your own startups, or you've been at Tesla, Impossible Foods and others, there's this interest in having real world people. They don't want to just hire a bunch of, Dartmouth grads who went and got their Harvard MBA. They want people who have real world experience. And that's made the whole industry a lot more diverse, starting from a base of purely white men, admittedly, but it is becoming more diverse.
And they can reach you how?
Oh, just Rachel at tpb.co is TPB stands for the production board. Rachel at tpb.co. Yeah, I would love to hear from people. I'm a huge, huge proponent of Michigan business and the economic development. I come back all the time. I still consider it my home.